Leon was a quiet boy who lived at the very edge of old Macau, in a small apartment perched above the lower slopes of Pinna Hill. Every night, long after the neighbors had closed their windows and the streets below had softened into a hush, he would slip out onto the narrow balcony with a paper lantern cupped gently in both hands. His grandmother always said he carried lanterns as if they were sleeping birds, careful, steady, and full of hope. From that balcony he could see almost everything that made Macau feel like a place half-dreamt, the slow sweep of the estuary, dark and silver under the moon, the lights of fishing boats drifting like stars that had fallen onto the water, and far in the distance, the faint golden glow of Taipa, shimmering like a promise. Leon didn't know when his fascination with lanterns began. Perhaps it started the night his grandmother told him that lanterns were the oldest messengers in the world. Before letters, before telephones, before anyone thought to cross the seas, she said, people already trusted light. Light travels. Light remembers. Light knows its way home. She said this as if it were a simple truth, like the fact that waves always return to the shore. Every evening, after finishing his homework and after the city had softened into its nocturnal rhythm, Leon prepared his ritual. He would choose the lantern carefully from the wooden box beside his bed. Some were red, some were blue, some painted with dragons curling around clouds. His favorite was a pale yellow one, hand-painted by his grandmother with a single lotus flower. It was old now, a little worn, but it carried a warmth that made Leon feel safe. He lit it with a match, touching the flame to the thin wick inside, and a gentle glow would bloom as if the lantern were taking its first breath. Then Leon whispered a wish. The wishes changed through the years, first childish ones about wanting a puppy or becoming an astronaut, then later questions he didn't know how to ask anyone else. Why do people forget things? Why do people leave? Why do I feel so much inside and not know what to do with it? He never expected answers. It simply soothed him to imagine the lantern floating through the layered history of the city below, past the old churches with their weathered stones, through the narrow alleyways that held centuries of footsteps, over temples where incense curled into the sky like ancient prayers. He imagined that all these places whispered back to the lantern, carrying his wishes with them. Some nights, when the air was still and the Pearl River reflected the moon perfectly, Leon thought he could feel the city listening. Not in a loud way, not with signs and miracles, but with a gentle presence, as if Macau itself were a soft-breathing creature, old and kind, leaning close to hear the heart of a boy who carried lanterns. His grandmother would step outside sometimes, leaning on her cane, her silhouette framed by the glow. "You're still awake, meu menino," she would whisper. "I'm just sending a wish," Leon answered. "Then make it a good one." Cities are like people. They answer only when you speak honestly. Leon always tried. As years passed, Macau changed. New bridges stretched across the water like ribbons of light. Hotels rose higher than any dream Leon had ever imagined. Streets that were once quiet became bright and loud. But the nights remained the same for him. The lanterns remained. The whispering remained. And somewhere deep in the city's layered heart, beneath the Portuguese tiles, beneath the Chinese temples, beneath the hum of ferries crossing the delta, something ancient and gentle seemed to stir whenever Leon lit a lantern. Something that had been waiting. Leon always believed Macau had two winds, one that carried the scent of salt from the South China Sea, and another that carried stories, old, wandering stories that drifted like ghosts between centuries. On the afternoons when school ended early, Leon would climb the steps of Pinna Hill and stand beneath the trees, letting both winds brush past him. One wind felt young and playful, tugging at his shirt as if inviting him to run. The other felt ancient, like a patient hand resting lightly on his shoulder. It was that second wind that began to reveal the history of the city to him, not through books, but through sensations, distant echoes, and glimpses that appeared when he least expected. The first time it happened, he was walking along the quiet streets near Lolo Square. The ground was damp after a summer rain, and the pastel houses glimmered softly under the afternoon light. Leon stopped to tie his shoelace, and suddenly the air shimmered, as if someone had lifted a thin curtain. He blinked. For a moment, just long enough to make him gasp, he saw the square as it had been centuries ago. There were sailors with sunburnt faces unloading crates from small boats. A Portuguese merchant in a wide-brimmed hat argued cheerfully with a Chinese boatman. Children ran past carrying baskets of lychees, laughing as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. He could even hear the old Cantonese saying his grandmother always repeated, "One who drinks from Lolo never forgets Macau." The words seemed to echo from the water well itself, humming faintly in the air. And then, blink, the vision dissolved, fading into the ordinary world again. Modern cars passed. A tourist snapped a photo of the tiled pavement. A woman called her dog. But Leon felt different. As if Macau had opened a tiny door for him and whispered, "You belong to my story too." That night, he told his grandmother what he had seen. She didn't laugh. "My boy," she said, settling into her wooden chair, "Macau has always been a place where worlds overlap. Long before you, long before me, long before the churches rose beside the temples. It was the winds that brought the Portuguese sailors here in the 16th century, those same winds you feel on Pinna Hill. Some people notice nothing. Some notice everything. And some hear the past speaking. Do you?" Leon asked. "Sometimes," she answered, with a small mysterious smile. After that, the visions grew a little clearer. Never overwhelming, never frightening, just soft moments where the past shimmered through the present like lantern light through silk. When Leon wandered near the ruins of St. Paul's, he felt a strange warmth in his chest. Standing before the great stone facade, he heard the faint echo of choir voices in Latin, drifting from the long-vanished church behind it. He imagined the Jesuit scholars who once walked these steps, writing dictionaries in Chinese, studying astronomy, mapping the stars. He could almost see them, shadows moving behind the engraved stone, their robes brushing against centuries of wind. On other days, when he walked through the narrow lanes of the old Chinese quarter, The city showed him different scenes, opera singers painting their faces in tiny rooms lit by oil lamps, herbal doctors sorting roots and powders, women weaving nets for fishermen who would set out before dawn. Macau spoke to him in fragments, but the fragments fit together like mosaic tiles. One afternoon, as he crossed Largo do Senado, he felt both winds rise suddenly. The warm monsoon breeze rushed over the square, while the older wind spun softly around him, carrying the scent of sandalwood from an unseen temple. Leon stood still, closing his eyes. The square changed again. But this time, instead of a single fleeting image, he felt the whole history of the place vibrating beneath the patterned stones. He heard Portuguese spoken beside Cantonese, faraway ships docking at the old maritime customs house, traders arriving with spices and silk, street vendors calling out dim sum in bamboo baskets. Time didn't feel like a straight line. It felt like ripples overlapping in a single pool. When he opened his eyes, everything looked normal again, just modern life flowing around him. But he knew better. The past was still there, layered beneath the surface like a faint echo waiting for someone to listen. And Leon, the quiet, observant Leon, was listening with all his heart. Later that evening, when he lit his nightly lantern, the flame wavered as if greeting the winds that had accompanied him all day. "Where do these stories come from?" he whispered. The lantern flickered once. The older wind brushed gently against his cheek. And somewhere deep in the city, perhaps in the ruins, perhaps in the old temples, perhaps in the stones warmed by centuries, Macau whispered back, almost inaudibly, "From you. And from everyone who walked here before you." Leon found the jade compass on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of afternoon when Macau felt half asleep beneath the warm haze drifting in from the estuary. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He had simply followed the old streets down from St. Augustine's Church, letting his feet choose the turns while his mind hovered somewhere between daydream and memory. He ended up on a narrow alley near Rua de Tercina, where antique shops crowded shoulder to shoulder, their windows glowing with time-worn treasures, porcelain bowls painted with dragons, wooden carvings smooth from thousands of touches, fragments of blue and white tiles from the early Portuguese houses, and maps yellowed by humidity and age. One shop in particular drew him in. It had no sign, no name, just a beaded curtain swaying lightly as if someone, or something, had breathed on it. Leon pushed it aside. Inside, the air felt old in a comforting way, like the inside of a cedar chest. Shelves bowed under the weight of centuries, rusted compasses used on spice routes, jade seals, coins with square holes, rosaries brought by missionaries, scrolls still faintly perfumed with sandalwood. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with thin silver hair tied in a low knot. His eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone so still. He looked at Leon as if he had been expecting him. "You found us," the old man said, not as a greeting but as an observation. I was just walking," Leon replied. "Of course. That is usually how important things are found." The man reached under the counter without looking and placed a small box on the wood. It was carved from dark rosewood, polished until it gleamed. Open it. Inside lay a simple jade disc, smooth, cool, and carved with a single starburst pattern at its center. It looked more like a talisman than a compass. "What is it?" Leon asked. "A guide," the old man said. "Though it does not point north. It points inward." Leon frowned, confused but drawn to it. When he touched the jade, it warmed instantly, as if recognizing him. The moment he lifted it, the air around him shifted. The room grew quieter, deeper. He felt as though he were standing between centuries again. The old man nodded slowly. "Many travelers passed through this city, Portuguese captains, Chinese merchants, Japanese traders, priests from Goa, sailors from Malacca. They brought compasses to guide their ships, but this one exists for another kind of voyage." Leon's heart thumped softly. Where did it come from? The old man leaned back, eyes narrowing with memory. Long ago, in the late 1500s, Macau was the first and only place in China where the Europeans were allowed to stay. The winds that carried their ships here also carried many questions about faith, science, the heavens. The Jesuit scholars built a college near St. Paul's, full of books from across the world. They studied China, and China studied them. It was a meeting not just of cultures but of dreams. He tapped the jade disc lightly. This compass was carved by a craftsman who believed that navigation was not only for the seas. He said that Macau was a city of thresholds, between east and west, land and water, past and future. He believed that anyone who truly listened to the winds here could learn to navigate themselves. Leon looked down. The starburst caught the dim light and glowed faintly. "But why give it to me?" "I am not giving it to you," the old man said gently. "It chose you. You are simply taking it home." Leon swallowed. "I don't understand." "You will. When the time is right." Just as Leon turned the compass over in his palm, the air shimmered again, the same soft distortion he had seen in Lolo Square. Except now it was stronger, clearer. For a heartbeat, the shop was gone. Instead he saw a bustling port, junks and caravels anchored side by side, sailors shouting in Portuguese and Cantonese, barrels rolling down planks, bells ringing from the fort above. He blinked, and the shop was back. The old man smiled knowingly. The compass lets you see what most people forget to notice. Macau is layered, boy. The past is never entirely past here. A quiet weight settled into Leon's chest, not heavy, just meaningful. "How much is it?" he asked. "For you?" The old man waved his hand. "A story has no price." Leon hesitated, then slipped the jade compass into his pocket. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, the old man called softly. "Remember, it will show you only what you are ready to see." Leon stepped outside. The sun had dipped lower, the light turning the stones golden. He touched the jade again. It pulsed with warmth, almost like a heartbeat. And for the first time in his life, he felt the wind change direction, not the playful young wind, nor the ancient one that carried history, but a new wind, one that seemed to rise from within him. Something had begun. The next morning, the jade compass felt heavier in Leon's pocket, though not in a burdensome way. It was as if it carried a quiet intention, a purpose he had not yet learned to name. When he held it in his hand, the warmth returned, pulsing softly like something alive. His grandmother noticed it immediately as he prepared his breakfast. "You're carrying something new," she said without looking up from slicing papaya. Leon hesitated. "Just something I found." She smiled the way people smile when they already know the answer. "Ah. Then you should take it to the place where everything here began." He frowned. "Where's that?" "Ama Temple," she said. "The temple of the sea goddess. Before the Portuguese sailors ever set foot here, before the churches rose, before the cobblestones were laid, the people prayed to Ama. They say Macau's very name came from her." Leon looked down at the jade compass, suddenly aware that the star pattern seemed to be glowing faintly in the morning light. So after breakfast, with the steady breeze guiding him, he walked toward the old temple that clung to the granite hillside overlooking the harbor. The Ama temple felt older than time itself. Its roofs curled like dragon tails, painted red and gold, their edges catching the sunlight. Thick coils of incense hung from the ceiling of the first pavilion, releasing slow streams of smoke that drifted upward like sighs from ancestors. Stone lions guarded the entrance, their faces worn smooth by centuries of hands. As Leon stepped inside, the air changed. The world softened, sounds dimmed, colors deepened, the very atmosphere thickened with memory. It was not his imagination. The temple was one of those rare places where the centuries overlapped so gently that even people without jade compasses could feel the weight of ages. Leon approached the oldest shrine, dedicated to Tin Hao, the sea goddess whom the Portuguese sailors long ago had misunderstood. When they arrived in the 1500s, they asked the local fishermen the name of the place. The fishermen, thinking the strangers were asking about the temple, said Amagao, the Bay of Ama. Over time, the name had softened into Macau. Leon whispered the story to himself, as if reciting an old myth. This city began with a misunderstanding, but a beautiful one. The compass stirred in his pocket, warm, insistent. He pulled it out. For the first time, the jade didn't just glow, it responded. A fine thread of light extended from the star engraving, faint but steady, pointing deeper into the temple. Leon followed. He moved through the winding stone paths, past altars carved with phoenixes, past the old pavilion where scholars once burned incense before journeys, past walls engraved with poems from travelers who had visited the temple centuries earlier. Each step seemed to echo not just his own footsteps, but the footsteps of all who had walked there before, fishermen praying for safe passage, Portuguese sailors seeking favorable winds, women asking blessings for their families, monks reciting ancient verses. Finally, the thread of light led him to a quiet courtyard high on the granite boulders. There were no tourists here, no sound except the rustle of leaves and the distant murmuring sea. At the far end of the courtyard was a stone plaque etched with 4 characters. The ancestral site of Ama. A place older than the city itself. As Leon approached, the compass grew warm, so warm he almost dropped it. Then everything around him shimmered. Macau's present dissolved. He stood now in the same courtyard, but 500 years earlier. The air smelled of salt and fresh fish. The harbor below was filled with wooden junks. Ama Temple was smaller, humbler, its colors more vibrant. People moved with purpose, fishermen offering incense, women lighting candles, sailors kneeling for good fortune. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the courtyard. From the haze of incense, a figure emerged, a young woman dressed in simple robes, her presence so calm and radiant that Leon felt no fear. She looked not quite real and not quite unreal, like a reflection on water. Her voice was soft but carried across the centuries. "You carry something that listens," she said. Leon's breath caught. "The compass," he whispered. She nodded. "A gift from the ones who saw this land as a meeting place. East and west, sea and sky, past and future. You stand where many paths converge." She lifted a hand gently, and Leon felt the compass pulse in response. "You feel the city's memories," she continued. "Not everyone does. Macau is a small place, but its soul is vast. Hold the compass close, and you will learn to walk through all its layers." Leon swallowed. "Why me?" "Because you listen," she said simply. "And because the city chose you." As quickly as she had appeared, the vision dissolved. The courtyard returned to its modern stillness. Leon stood alone again, the compass cooling slowly in his hand. But he was not the same boy who had entered the temple. He felt the weight of Macau's beginnings, the breath of its centuries, and the presence of the winds that shaped it. Something in him whispered, "This is only the first door." And he believed it. That night, Leon fell asleep faster than he expected. Maybe it was the incense still clinging to his clothes from Ama Temple. Maybe it was the warmth of the jade compass resting under his pillow. Or maybe it was the quiet hum of the city settling into its nocturnal rhythm, ferries slowing on the water, scooters fading into the distance, the soft chiming of temple bells carried by the evening breeze. Whatever the reason, when sleep came, it came deeply. And it brought him a dream unlike any he had ever known. He stood at the foot of Guia Hill, though he didn't remember climbing it. The air was misty, glowing faintly silver, and from somewhere high above came a rhythmic pulse, like a distant heartbeat in the sky. When he looked up, he saw Guia Lighthouse shining through the fog. Except, it wasn't quite the lighthouse he knew from school trips. This one seemed older, its stones whiter, its lantern brighter than any modern bulb. It glowed with the warm, steady fire of centuries. And its light wasn't just bright, it moved, sweeping across the dream landscape like a guardian watching over sleeping waters. As Leon walked toward it, the ground shifted beneath him, not in a frightening way, but as though the hill itself were alive and adjusting to his steps. The mist thinned, revealing layers of history gently overlapping. He saw Portuguese sailors climbing the hill, torches in hand, long before the lighthouse had ever been built. They looked exhausted from storms, their clothes torn, their faces withered by salt and wind. Yet when they reached the top, they smiled, not because of what stood there, but because of what they saw below. Macau, still young, still small, glowing softly under moonlight. A safe harbor. The dream shifted again. Now he saw Chinese soldiers from the Qing dynasty, in uniforms of deep blue and black, patrolling the hill during times of tension with foreign powers. Their boots struck the earth with disciplined rhythm. Behind them, the unfinished fort of Guia rose stone by stone. Another shift. Jesuit priests carried astronomical instruments up the slope, quadrants, astrolabes, heavy crates filled with charts. They spoke quietly in Portuguese and Latin, pointing at the stars. For a moment Leon heard them clearly. Here, the skies of Europe and of China meet. The dream deepened. The scenes layered. He saw the Mongha artillery batteries, the British ships that once lingered just outside the harbor, the years of diplomacy and conflict, the way Macau balanced itself like a tightrope walker between empires. And then, a beam of light swept across all of it. The lighthouse had been lit. Leon found himself standing directly in front of Guia Lighthouse's door. The thick wooden panels were engraved with swirling cloud patterns he had never noticed in waking life. When he touched them, they swung open without a sound. Inside, the spiral staircase awaited, illuminated by spirals of warm light that curled upwards like the inside of a seashell. He climbed. With each step, he felt the dream deepen. Voices from centuries past drifted around him, sea captains shouting commands, monks chanting in Latin, fishermen laughing, mothers singing lullabies, winds carrying Portuguese fado across the harbor. These were not ghosts. They were memories, echoes woven into the stones. At the top, he stepped onto the lantern deck. The view stole his breath. Macau glowed beneath him, not as a single moment in time, but as every version of itself at once. The old fishing village, the Portuguese settlement, the walled fortifications, the neon casinos, the colonial mansions, the temples older than all of them. They overlapped like transparent pages of an illuminated manuscript, each era shining through the next. And at the center of this layered city was a quiet pulse of light that matched the jade compass under his pillow. The lighthouse keeper stood beside him. He hadn't noticed the man appear, but dreams often work that way. The keeper was tall, weathered, his uniform simple and old-fashioned, something from the 19th century, perhaps. His eyes reflected the lighthouse beam as though mirrors lived behind them. "You've come far," the keeper said. His voice was calm, deep, almost tidal. Leon swallowed. "I didn't mean to come. I just dreamed." "Dreams are doorways," the keeper replied. "And this city has many doors." He rested a hand on the railing and looked out across the harbor. Guia Lighthouse was built in 1864. The first on the China coast. A guide for the lost, a promise of land after storms. For sailors, it meant life. For Macau, it meant identity. Leon listened. And then the keeper said something that felt like it was meant only for him. Macau shines because it remembers. It remembers storms and calms, wars and peace, arrivals and departures. And you, boy with the jade compass, are beginning to remember too. Leon blinked, suddenly aware that the lighthouse beam wasn't just shining outward. It was shining inward, into him, illuminating thoughts he didn't know he held. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered. The keeper smiled softly. "Follow the light that listens to you." And with that, the dream began to dissolve, light turning to mist, mist turning to darkness, darkness turning to dawn. Leon woke with the compass warm against his chest, glowing faintly. And though the room was quiet, he could still hear the lighthouse keeper's final words, echoing like a soft bell inside him. "This city chose you because you carry its light forward." For the next several days, Leon walked through Macau with the feeling that the city was not simply around him, but watching him. Not in a threatening way, more like a host watching a guest discover secret rooms for the first time. The jade compass pulsed softly at unpredictable moments, as though responding to invisible tides. Sometimes it felt warm, like sunlight caught in stone. Other times it tingled, as if tiny sparks moved inside it. But on this particular afternoon, as Leon wandered toward Rua de Felicidade, the compass did something entirely new. It began to hum. Not loudly. Not even audibly. It was more like a vibration, gentle, steady, and filled with intention. The sound traveled through Leon's fingers, up his arm, into his chest. And suddenly he knew. The street was about to reveal itself. Rua de Felicidade, once the most bustling street in old Macau, glowed under lanterns that swayed in the late afternoon breeze. The iconic red shutters stood half open, like eyelids preparing to dream. Tourists snapped photos. The smell of almond cookies drifted from a nearby shop. Everything appeared normal. But the compass hummed stronger. A shimmer passed over the street, almost imperceptible, like heat rising from stone. Leon stopped walking. Time seemed to hold its breath. And then the street transformed. The red shutters flew open all at once, not physically, but in memory. What Leon saw next was not the present and not quite the past, but an in-between state where both existed simultaneously, like two reflections on the same surface of water. Performers in elaborate Cantonese opera costumes hurried out of doorways, adjusting their embroidered robes. Their voices tinkled like small bells. A woman painted her face with white powder and a bright crimson flourish around her eyes, though no one but Leon could see her. Further along the street, men carried crates of dried seafood, shouting prices in a mix of Cantonese and Portuguese. Paper lanterns glowed brighter than any modern light bulb. Musicians tuned instruments whose strings shimmered with faint magic. Then came the most fantastical element. At the far end of the street, a procession materialized, a serpent-like dragon of paper and silk, taller than any building, winding through the air as though alive. except it wasn't held by dancers. It floated freely. Leon stared, breathless, as the dragon's luminous eyes turned toward him. The creature dipped its head, acknowledging him. The compass hummed louder, as though bowing in return. Leon whispered, "Are you real?" The dragon's whiskers twirled in the breeze, almost playfully. In its shimmering scales, Leon saw reflections, not of the street, but of centuries, the early traders, the opium houses, the theater performers, the families who had lived and died in the narrow rooms behind the red shutters. The dragon held all their stories. It was made of memory. Suddenly, a whisper rose around him, not from one voice but from thousands, layered together like echoes in a canyon. He hears us. He remembers us. He walks our street. Leon realized the voices belonged to the street itself, its people, its past, its unspoken moments. Rua de Felicidade was not merely a place. It was a living archive. He walked slowly forward. The dragon hovered beside him, moving with feline grace. As they advanced, the street shifted again. Now the ground shimmered with water, as though Rua de Felicidade were built on the surface of a lake. Lanterns reflected downward into the shimmering depths. Each reflection opened into another version of Macau, one where children played near colonial mansions, one where pirates anchored secretly, one where fireworks burst above Chinese junks, one where Portuguese soldiers marched in formation, one where everything was quiet. Leon stepped carefully, though the water held him like glass. The dragon glided over it effortlessly. "You're showing me everything," Leon murmured. But the spaces between the reflections showed something else, threads of light stretching through time, connecting the lives of people who had never met but had breathed the same air, walked the same stones, loved and feared and hoped in the same narrow streets. It struck him that the city wasn't just layered, it was interconnected, alive in ways he had never imagined. He felt a presence beside him. He turned. His grandmother stood there, not as she was now, but younger, smiling, holding a lantern. Yet he realized instantly this wasn't truly her. It was the city's memory of someone like her. A reminder that every person who walked these streets became part of their story. The vision lifted gently, dissolving like fog at sunrise. The dragon lowered its head to Leon once more. In its glowing eyes, he saw a message, not in words, but in feeling. You are part of us now. Walk gently. Listen deeply. More doors will open. The compass stopped humming, returning to quiet warmth. In an instant, the street returned to its ordinary appearance, tourists, shops, red shutters gently swaying. But Leon knew the truth. Rua de Felicidade had revealed itself fully, accepting him as a keeper of its memory. He exhaled slowly. And somewhere above the rooftops, he thought he heard the dragon's distant, echoing breath, like a sigh from a dream that had not ended, only folded itself away for later. Leon had always liked bridges. There was something comforting about the way they stretched across the water, neither here nor there, suspended between shores, between decisions, between breaths. He felt at home in places that connected other places. But Saivan Bridge felt different that night. It was nearly midnight when Leon walked toward it, the jade compass warm in his pocket like a sleeping heartbeat. The city behind him glowed in gentle colors, temples burning incense into the sky, casinos shining like artificial stars, quiet alleys lit by paper lanterns that still carried the scent of Rua de Felicidade's phantom dragon. Ahead, the bridge shimmered under the moonlight. The water beneath it was unusually still, so still it looked like a sheet of dark glass stretching toward Taipa. Leon stepped onto the bridge, feeling the gentle vibration of cars passing far away, but the part of the walkway he stood on seemed to hum differently, a faint, rhythmic pulse, almost musical. Then the compass stirred. It didn't simply glow or warm. It pulled. Not forcefully, more like a gentle tug at his chest, a suggestion rather than a command. Leon followed the pull, walking toward the midpoint of the bridge where the arch rose like the spine of a sleeping dragon. When he reached the highest point, the world shifted. The lights of Macau and Taipa softened into halos. The water below brightened with reflections that weren't real, reflections of buildings that no longer existed, boats that had sailed centuries ago, and constellations arranged in patterns lost to time. Saivan Bridge had opened a threshold. Leon inhaled slowly. "Another door," he whispered. The wind answered, not with words, but with a change in temperature. The warm monsoon breeze brushed his left cheek, bringing the scent of the sea. The ancient historical wind touched his right cheek, carrying faint incense and the echo of temple bells. But a third wind rose between them. A wind that wasn't from the sea or the past. A wind that was entirely internal. It swirled around Leon like invisible silk, and the reflections in the water began to move, slowly, deliberately. First came the Portuguese caravels, their sails white in moonlight. They glided across the water, but instead of casting shadows, they cast echoes of the prayers sailors once whispered while approaching the unknown coast. Then Chinese dragon boats appeared, their paddlers chanting in ancient rhythms that seemed to vibrate inside Leon's bones. These two scenes intertwined seamlessly, as if the water held the memory of the first encounters between East and West, those fragile, tentative moments when cultures approached each other cautiously, each carrying its own fears and hopes. The compass pulsed once. The water brightened. And suddenly the surface of the water opened. Not physically, he wasn't falling. But visually, symbolically, mystically. It opened like a curtain being drawn aside. Below the bridge, beneath the layer of present-day reflections, lay a river of wishes, glowing threads drifting like fireflies on a dark current. Each thread was a wish from someone who had crossed this bridge, this water, this city. Centuries of longing braided into light. Leon saw a Portuguese sailor wishing to return home safely. A Macanese woman praying for her child's health. Fishermen asking the sea to be kind. Students wishing for a future they couldn't yet imagine. Lovers whispering promises into the night breeze. Travelers hoping Macau would be gentle with their hearts. monks praying for harmony between worlds. The threads intertwined like a luminous tapestry stretching endlessly across time. Leon felt tears prickling his eyes. Not sad ones, just overwhelmed ones. The beauty of it was too much to hold. Then one thread rose from the water, drifting toward him like a feather of gold. It hovered before his face. Inside it, he saw the Ama temple courtyard, the young woman from his vision, her calm eyes reflecting the sea. She spoke softly, though her lips did not move. Macau remembers every wish. What will yours be, child of the compass? Leon swallowed hard. I don't know yet, he whispered. Everything is changing. That is how you know you are walking truth. The golden thread wrapped around his wrist gently, like a bracelet woven from moonlight, then dissolved into the air. Behind him, the wind shifted again, carrying a new sound. A heartbeat? A drum? A distant chant? No, footsteps. He turned and saw a faint silhouette approaching from the far end of the bridge. The figure was tall, cloaked in deep blue, walking slowly but deliberately toward him. Leon's pulse quickened. The compass glowed brighter. The water's luminous reflections trembled. Everything in the world, every wish, every echo, every wind, seemed to pause. The figure stepped into the moonlight. And Leon realized, with a shiver, that he had seen this man before. Not in waking life, but in his dream. The lighthouse keeper. Only now, he wasn't a dream. He stood on Saivan Bridge. Between the two winds. Between the two shores. Between every version of the city that had ever existed. Leon, the keeper said calmly, it's time. For what? Leon whispered, breath-catching. The lighthouse keeper's eyes reflected the glowing river of wishes below. For you to learn why the city chose you. The lighthouse keeper stood before Leon, his figure sharp against the moonlit sky, yet softened by the shimmering folds of reality that danced around the bridge. For a moment, Leon felt as if he stood not on concrete and steel but on a ribbon of light stretched between centuries. The jade compass vibrated in his hand, slow at first, then steadily, as though recognizing the keeper. You can see me, the man said, almost sounding relieved. Good. That means the city's doors are fully open to you now. Leon swallowed, trying to steady his breath. You were in my dream. The keeper nodded. Yes. Dreams are the city's quietest language. Now it speaks louder. He stepped to the railing and looked down at the glowing river of wishes beneath the bridge. Leon followed, leaning over carefully. The water rippled, not from wind, but from unseen movements far deeper than the surface. The keeper spoke again, calmly, as if explaining a simple fact of nature. This is the meeting of waters. Leon frowned. But this isn't real water. It's more real than you think. This is where memory, longing, and time flow together. Every city has such a place, but only a few make theirs visible. He lifted a hand slightly, and the water stirred in response. Silvery ripples opened like petals, revealing layers beneath layers. At the top, the present-day reflections, casinos glowing neon blue and gold, apartment towers rising like lanterns against the night sky, ferries carving bright paths in the harbor. Beneath them, older layers shimmered, Chinese junks anchored near Colon, Portuguese forts firing warning shots into the fog, Macanese families celebrating feast days beside colonial mansions, firecrackers bursting during Lunar New Year, nuns walking solemnly through the old convents, traders haggling in half a dozen languages. Deeper still, Leon saw something unexpected. A dark, ancient current, older than Macau itself, older than any human settlement on the Pearl River Delta. In its depths moved colossal shadows shaped like fish, dragons, and serpents. These creatures glowed faintly, as if carved from moonlight and ink. Leon stepped back instinctively. What are those? The keeper's voice softened. The memories that predate memory. Before the Portuguese came, before the Ming dynasty, before fishermen built houses on these shores, this land belonged to the sea and the winds. Every place has a spirit. These are the shapes of Macau's earliest breath. One of the luminous creatures rose closer to the underside of the water's surface, and Leon could see it clearly now, a dragon, but unlike the one from Rua de Felicidade. This one was ancient, slow, patient, with eyes like pale stars and a mane that rippled like clouds. It opened its mouth. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the entire bridge. Leon pressed a hand to his chest. His heartbeat matched the hum. The compass glowed in synchrony, pulse for pulse, light for light. The keeper watched him closely. You feel it, don't you? Leon nodded, stunned. Yes. That is because the compass you carry is carved from the same jade that once rested deep in the seabed here, long before it rose into land. You are holding a piece of what Macau was before it was called Macau. Leon stared at the compass, suddenly aware that what he carried was not simply an object, but a fragment of the city's soul. The keeper continued. This bridge, Saivan Bridge, was built to connect two shores. But in the language of the city, it connects something else, the outer world and the inner one. When someone crosses it with an open heart, the waters reveal themselves. And when someone crosses it with the compass, his eyes shone. The waters awaken. Leon felt dizzy, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what he was seeing. The river of wishes began to swirl, threads of light spiraling upward. Memories whispered around him as if the centuries themselves were drawing breath. A woman's voice cried out in Portuguese, "Meu filho." A child laughed in Cantonese. A monk whispered a prayer in Latin. A sailor recited a vow in old Macanese patois. All overlapping in harmony. The keeper placed a hand on Leon's shoulder, a steady, grounding weight. You are not chosen because you are special, he said gently. You are chosen because you are listening. Macau does not need heroes. It needs witnesses. Those who can hear its songs and carry them forward. Leon looked at the swirling waters. What am I meant to do? For now? The keeper smiled faintly. Follow. Watch. Let the city show you what it remembers. Let it guide you where it needs you to go. The dragon beneath the water rose fully now, its eyes glowing like dawn breaking underwater. Its breath formed ripples of silver that reached the surface and burst in tiny sparks. The keeper bowed his head. The Ancient Ones greet you. Leon felt tears in his eyes. Why me? Because every few generations, the keeper said softly, the city chooses one person who can walk between its layers. The last was long before your grandmother was born. The next may not come for another century. He turned toward the horizon, where the moon cast a perfect path of light across the bay. Come, Leon. The waters have one more truth to show you tonight. As they leaned together over the railing, the river of wishes parted gently, revealing something glowing at the deepest point of the depths. A symbol. A shape. A circle of light forming into something unmistakable. The star engraved on Leon's jade compass. But much larger. Ancient. Radiant. Turning slowly like a wheel of time. Leon's breath caught. This symbol, what does it mean? For centuries, the keeper whispered, we believed it was a compass rose. But it isn't. He paused. And then, with a gravity that made the winds fall silent. It is a map. Leon's heart hammered. A map to where? The keeper looked at him, and in his eyes Leon saw the full depth of Macau's oceans, temples, alleys, ships, winds, drums, lanterns, and centuries. To the place where the city hides its truest memory. The waters glowed brighter. The compass glowed in Leon's hand. And for the first time since the beginning of the story, Leon felt the city call him by name. When Leon returned home that night, he felt changed in ways he could not name. Not older, not wiser, just more permeable, as if the city's winds now blew through him instead of around him. His grandmother was already asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of a bamboo chime she kept near the window. Leon walked straight to his balcony, carrying the jade compass in one hand and his favorite lantern, the old pale yellow one with the lotus painted by his grandmother, in the other. He didn't light it yet. He waited. Because something in him knew that lighting a lantern now was no longer a simple ritual. It was a conversation. Below, Macau stretched in its layered beauty, temples glowing like embers, neon signs flickering like restless spirits, fairies carving silver trails in the dark water, the silhouette of Guia Hill standing like a guardian of ancient stories. Leon felt the presence of the lighthouse keeper somewhere out there, maybe on the waters, maybe in the wind. Watching. Guiding. Waiting. The compass warmed. Not in pulses now, but in waves, like a tide rising. So, Leon whispered, show me. And the compass did. A soft line of light extended from the star engraving, thin as a hair at first, then brightening into a glowing thread. But instead of pointing toward a place in the city, it pointed toward his lantern. Leon held the lantern close. The thread of light sank into the paper walls like water soaking into cloth. The lotus painting brightened until it looked almost alive, petals opening in slow, radiant breaths. He lit the candle inside. The flame rose, golden, steady, impossibly bright. At that moment, the world paused. A single breeze swept through the balcony, carrying the scent of incense from Ama Temple and the salty breath of the harbor. The lantern glowed so intensely that it cast shadows in colors Leon had never seen, deep blues like midnight tides, soft reds like ancient lacquer, shimmering yellows like the eyes of mythical creatures. And then, slowly, gracefully, the lantern lifted from his hands. Not upward, not outward, but inward. It floated through him, as if passing through the space between his ribs, not made of paper and flame but of memory and breath. Leon gasped softly. Inside the lantern, he saw scenes unfold, memories of Macau not from books or dreams, but from the city itself. The first fishermen building wooden shacks near the bay, anchoring their hopes in the kindness of the sea. The arrival of Portuguese sailors, their ships battered by storms, stepping onto a shore where Ama Temple stood watching, silent but present. Jesuit scholars building St. Paul's College, filling it with maps, books, telescopes, attempting to reconcile Eastern philosophy with Western science. Chinese and Portuguese children playing together in the alleys, inventing a language of their own, Patois, a blend of everything they were and everything they hoped to be. Revolts, treaties, storms, fires, each leaving its mark not just in history books but in the emotional fabric of the city. The construction of modern bridges, lacing the islands together like nerves of a waking creature. But beneath all of these scenes was something more fundamental. Macau longing. Even across centuries, Leon sensed it, a longing not for power or wealth, but for harmony. A longing to balance its dual nature, east and west, land and sea, memory and change. The lantern pulsed with this longing. "This is what you wanted to show me," Leon whispered. His voice shook. And the lantern answered, not with words, but by unfolding. Literally unfolding. The paper peeled open like the petals of a lotus flower, revealing layers upon layers of scenes, each connected by golden veins of light. For the first time, Leon understood the true purpose of his nightly ritual. He wasn't sending wishes to the city. The city had been sending wishes to him. Wishes that someone would listen. Wishes that someone would carry its stories forward. Wishes that someone would understand its heart. The lantern's glowing core expanded until it filled the balcony with light. Leon shielded his eyes. In that brightness, he saw the lighthouse keeper's silhouette appear beside him, not as a dream figure now, but as a presence woven into the city's fabric. "You are ready," the keeper said softly. "For what?" Leon whispered. The keeper pointed to the heart of the lantern, now opening like a portal, revealing the same ancient symbol he had seen in the depths under Sai Van Bridge, the star map of Macau's forgotten memory. "To enter the final layer," the keeper said. "To see where the city keeps its truest self." Leon's pulse raced. "Will I come back?" The keeper smiled gently. "All who listen deeply return." But they return changed. The lantern's inner light dimmed to a calm, inviting glow. "Step forward, Leon." He did. The moment he touched the light, everything fell away. The balcony, the city, the night. Like paper turning to ash in a warm breeze. He felt no fear. Only purpose. And somewhere in the dissolving world behind him, Macau whispered one final message as the chapter closed. "What you seek in me, you also seek in yourself." Leon stepped into the lantern's core, expecting to fall. But he didn't fall. He drifted. As weightless as paper, as calm as a tide at sunrise. The world around him was no longer the balcony, nor the bridge, nor the dreamlit lighthouse. Instead, he floated in a vast chamber of light, a chamber shaped like nothing his mind had words for. It was at once a room, an ocean, a sky, a memory. Everything shimmered softly, as if woven from starlight reflected on water. The jade compass hovered in front of him now, turning slowly in the air. Each rotation shed a thin ring of light that spiraled outward, forming patterns, circles, waves, blossoms, that reflected Macau's geography, the peninsula, Taipa, Kowloon, the bridges, the sea routes that once connected east and west. It was the city, but not the city made of stones and buildings. It was the city of echoes, the city of breath, the city of memory. Leon whispered, "Is this Macau's heart?" A familiar voice answered behind him. "Yes." The lighthouse keeper stood there, though he did not walk toward Leon. He merely appeared, as though drawn by the same force that held Leon suspended. "This is the place where all its versions meet," the keeper said. "Where the fisherman's prayers, the sailor's hopes, the scholar's questions, the mother's fears, the children's laughter, and the dragon's dreams all gather." Leon looked around. At the edges of the chamber, he saw translucent figures drifting gently. A father teaching his child to fish on the old Praia Grande. A Portuguese woman lighting a candle in São Domingo's church. A Chinese herbalist grinding roots in a tiny shop. Jesuit astronomers charting constellations. Fishermen repairing nets. Dragon boats slicing through mist. The glowing paper dragon from Rua de Felicidade. The ancient sea dragons moving slowly beneath everything. All layered, all peaceful, all breathing in the same rhythm. Macau's rhythm. Leon felt tears on his cheeks without realizing he was crying. "Why did all of this come to me?" he asked quietly. "I'm just a boy." The lighthouse keeper stepped closer, not physically, but emotionally, the way adults do when they speak from truth and tenderness. "You are a boy who listens," he said. "And cities, like people, long to be heard." The compass drifted into Leon's hands. He held it gently. "Every few generations," the keeper continued, "Macau opens its deepest layer to someone who can carry its stories. Not to historians. Not to leaders. To listeners." Leon shook his head. "But what do I do now?" The keeper smiled in the soft, tired way of someone who has waited centuries to give an answer. You do what you've always done, Leon. He placed a hand over the compass and Leon's fingers. You light a lantern. And suddenly, gently, Leon understood. His ritual had never been small. Never trivial. Never childish. Each lantern he had lit was a thread in the river of wishes. Each wish he whispered had helped keep the meeting of waters open. Each night he gazed over the city, he was already performing the task Macau had chosen him for. To remember. To witness. To love the city quietly, faithfully, without agenda. The chamber of light began to fold inward, like a petal closing. The figures drifted into warm darkness. The compass dimmed to a soft glow. The keeper's final words echoed. Where stories meet, hearts rest. Leon closed his eyes. He felt the lantern's light wrap around him like a blanket. And then he was back. Back on the balcony. Back in the night breeze. Back in his body. The lantern rested in his hands exactly as before, its flame now a gentle dot of gold. The compass lay quiet in his palm, cool and humble. The city exhaled around him, fairies honking softly, waves lapping against stone, distant bells chiming from Ama Temple, the lighthouse casting its patient beam. He sat down. He breathed. And for the first time, he felt Macau not just as a place he lived in, but as a companion, old, gentle, layered, humming softly beneath the stars. A city that tucked him in at night. A city that whispered lullabies in temple smoke and sea breeze. A city that had chosen him not for greatness, but for tenderness. Leon smiled, closed his eyes, and let the city hum him to sleep.